Lives Matter, not Black Lives Matter, and the primary reason for that is that the fundamental premise of Black Lives Matter, that police killings happen more to African Americans than anybody else, is just false. It's not supported by data. It's a myth, and so I can't really support Black Lives Matter because the foundational premise is just not true. The police brutality is definitely an issue, but it's an issue for all lives, not just Black lives.
Hallelujah.
I know.
Hallelujah. Them cops be shooting everybody.
They be shooting everybody up in here. Yes, I know. Finally. Stats over feels.
Yeah.
Over feels.
Not only that, common humanity, identity politics for the win.
Yes,
Come on. White people don't like getting shot by the cops. Newsflash. Newsflash. White people hate getting shot by the cops too.
To demonstrate this, I can just take all of the cases from 2015, chosen at random. There's Timothy Smith was killed by a police officer who was mistakenly thought he was reaching into his waistband to grab a gun. The shooting was ruled justified. William Lemon was killed after he allegedly failed to show his hands upon request. The shooting was ruled justified. Ryan Bollinger was shot dead by a cop who said he was moving strangely and walking toward her. The shooting was ruled justified. Derek Cruz was shot in the face moments after he opened the door for police officers serving a warrant for drug arrest. Cops recovered marijuana from his house. The shooting was ruled justified. Daniel Elrod robbed a dollar store and when confronted by police, allegedly failed to raise his hands upon request. Through his window.
So he's making the argument that all of these are resisting arrest, correct?
All these are white people in 2015 who were unarmed, shot by the police in circumstances that seem like they were wrongfully shot. And then, however, it was ruled, later in courts that it was justified.
Right. So these are white people. But he is, all the people he's listing, there's a resisting arrest component here that's
I don't know. I mean, he said one guy I'm not familiar with any of his cases. He said one guy just opened the door and was shot in the face. So I don't know.
Oh, okay. I missed that one. I missed that one.
Right.
Okay.
So, but I mean, this is good because usually when you push back against this narrative, the BLM side will instantly go, "Oh, you're just a bootlicker. You just want the fascist cops to step all over you." And TJump's already established that no, he's just saying that this is a problem about policing. It's not a problem necessarily about race.
Yeah, widespread.
Window, who witnesses if the event insists otherwise, he was shot dead and no criminal charges were filed. Ralph Willis was shot dead when officers mistakenly thought he was reaching for a gun. David Kasich was shot twice in the back by a police officer while lying face down on the ground. A 6-year-old
Ooh, ouch.
Not a good one.
Down. Okay. That didn't sound like resisting arrest.
We're about to get, he's a 6-year-old about to get shot in the car. I don't think the 6-year-old was resisting arrest, obviously.
Jeremy Mardis was killed by a police officer while sitting in the passenger seat of a car. The officer's intended target was his father, who was sitting in the driver's seat with his hands raised out the window. Autumn Steele was shot dead when a police officer, startled by her German Shepherd, immediately fired his weapon at the animal, catching her in the crossfire. For brevity's sake, I'll stop there, but the list goes on. For every black person killed by the police, there's at least one, usually two white people killed in the exact same way. For example, the day before cops barged into the home of Breonna Taylor and killed her, the cops barged into the home of a white man named Duncan Lemp and killed him and wounded his girlfriend who was sleeping beside him. Even George Floyd, whose death was particularly brutal, has a white counterpart in Tony Timpa, who was killed by cops in 2016 in Dallas.
And this is what's disturbing, because I argue with my friends or my family about this situation, and because the national news only covers, when an unarmed black person is shot by the police, it creates this totally false perception of reality, like there's this widespread problem of just unarmed black people just mowed down by the police and white people just get off scot-free. And it's like, no, it's just when the white people unarmed killed by the police, it's just not reported on whatsoever.
Yeah, sad.
With a police officer who had his knee pinned on his back for 12.
It's got to all be for politics too, because you would want to if you actually wanted change, police reform, you would want to publish this data just as much, because you'd want the whites who have more power at the voting booth, since they just have raw numbers, to enact change, right?
Well, that's what's so weird about this, because you would assume that if the people advocating for police reform were pragmatic or actually cared, about the things they're talking about, they would do exactly what you're saying. You're saying, okay, we need to get white people on board with this message, so let's try to spread the narrative about police violence to white people so that they feel involved. But no, they don't, and that really shows that this isn't really, in my opinion, this isn't really about police brutality. It's about some weird, we need racial justice, and you dare make this about anything other than black people.
Yeah, that racial justice thing is what they really want, which sounds a little tiny bit like racism to me.
Well, it's also, and it's so funny because it's just like the protests and the riots. All these protests and riots are just destroying their own cause. It's so funny. It's like, if anything's going to get Donald Trump elected, who I assume all the Black Lives Matter people hate, it's them. It's all these protests and all these riots. It's so funny. Everyone was like, oh, the coronavirus is going to help Joe Biden. And then it's like, well, how about we start destroying property? How about we start burning buildings down? How about, it's so funny. It was the day before yesterday, right? Where the story comes out that, anonymous sources, right? So you can take it as you will. Anonymous source claims that Trump called people who died in like World War I and World War II like suckers and idiots or whatever. I forget the exact line, but it's something like that. So this is a big story. Everyone's running with it. And then that night, it's like, a bunch of Black Lives Matter people come and they start kicking people out of restaurants in New York City.
Yeah.
Violently.
Completely.
In his video. Yeah,
displace the narrative.
Yeah. This video of violent, angry Black Lives Matter supporters going down the streets of New York City and forcing people to vacate restaurants that are obviously already struggling because of coronavirus. Yeah. And it's like, this is so great. Yeah, it's so funny. There's a national narrative about Trump calling veterans, people who died in the war, idiots. And then Black Lives Matter is like, no, fuck that. Let's make the narrative about us being fucking crazy and violent.
Yeah. Bad news. Bad news.
12 minutes instead of 8. The video, you can hear Timpa whimpering and begging that he can't breathe and that he should be let out. And after his death, the cops began cracking jokes about telling him to wake up for school. Criminal charges initially brought against them were later dropped. Let me pause there for a moment and just linger on that point. I really encourage you to watch the video of Tony Timpa being killed. Just to search it on YouTube. It should be the first thing that pops up.
That's a video we've talked about many times. Many times. You bring it up
I think,
a lot.
Sam Harris does the best. I forget which stream it was. He talked about it at length, and I think he did the best job talking about it.
Yeah. Brutal.
And observe what you feel when you watch that video. Do you get that same surge of emotion as
Ben McGuire for $5 says, making my first super chat to y'all to say I'm Team Adam. Sitch wanted me to interrupt the stream if any pertinent super chats went by, so I felt like it was my duty.
I was like, we should start trying to read super chats as they come in if they're like related to whatever we're watching at the time. So thank you, Adam, for reading a super chat. Had nothing to do with what we were watching.
It was supposed to be about what we're. I'm sorry. Right. I thought it was supposed to be about me.
Thank you. I will read this. Varen Getorix for $5 says, Jake and Jangles are the epitome of facts over truth. Did you see Destiny versus Surf debate? Hashtag Liberty Prime. Yes, we did see Destiny versus Surf debate. Actually, we're trying, and we might be talking to Surfs next Sunday.
Yeah.
About that debate. And
Lance,
about the House.
Lance is the guy. Yes, we reached out to him. He couldn't come on today. We were going to watch that video, but we were going to put it off, obviously, if we can talk to Lance directly. So tune in next week. We'll have a discussion with the Surfs. Oh, yeah. What's your take on Jangles, Mr. Science Guy? God, oh, man. I can't take that guy seriously.
No.
Yeah. So you have the same take. All right, good.
Yes, that's the same take.
When you watch George Floyd being killed by Derek Chauvin, and if not, I want you to consider maybe there is some racism, but it's not with the cops. It might be with you. I think at a gut level, it's hard for most people to see the same level of outrage when cops kill a white person than a black person, because it's just the victim narrative kind of a thing seems to portray African Americans as more worthy of victimhood than other races, when in fact the same problems exist for everyone. And so it's really more of an all lives matter issue than and skin color just shouldn't really come into it. It should be Black Lives Matter should have been a movement about police violence for everyone, not just for Black lives. It doesn't really make sense to try and focus on a Black lives issue when it really.
Why do you think the mainstream media doesn't run with the white killings, since everyone is under the assumption that if it bleeds, it leads? So anything violent is going to be more likely national news. But these are all violent interactions with the police, but it totally mums the word on them.
Well, because it doesn't suit anyone's narrative, because the left, unfortunately, is very focused on the race issue and everything's about racial justice. So they're not going to talk about white shootings because it destroys the narrative that the police are racist.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. And then the right isn't going to talk about it because they're generally pro-police, so they don't want to bring attention.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Perfect. Yeah, that's a great point. So
they don't want to bring attention to when the cops kill white people who, obviously seems like they shouldn't have been shot or killed by the police.
So it's like this narrative vacuum.
Right.
It's
exactly.
like, oh no. It's funny because you do have people on the right that are like outspoken LGBT. I think Milo Yiannopoulos is the most prominent.
Well, I don't know if I'd label him pro-LGBT just because he's gay. Oh
yeah, I guess he is anti-LGBT. Oh,
didn't he say he wishes he was born straight?
Well, I know there are people that go to the conservative side. There's some predominantly gay activists that have gone to the conservative side. But I always wonder, Milo Yiannopoulos is like a perfect example of this because he really does. He's like LGBT, but kind of against himself in LGBT matters. So, yeah, obviously that's a bad example. So I'm going to shut up now. Let's move on.
Really doesn't disproportionately affect Black lives. I mean, you might agree that people killed plenty of unarmed, or police killed plenty of white unarmed people too, but maybe it's that they kill more unarmed Black people, like disproportionately. That's significantly more, but that's where the data comes in. It's misleading to claim there's some kind of racial bias here, because even though 37% of police deaths are African Americans, 37% of violent crime is also African American. So the amount of deaths is proportional, and there's been 4 studies that have found this to be the case, that there isn't a racial bias among deaths by police. So there it is.
So this is a very important point. TJump has just stated that the numbers of Black people killed by police is only disproportional if you look at their percentage of the population, because obviously there's a minority of Black people compared to the white population in America. However, if you look at the crime statistics in terms of amount of crimes committed by Black people, they are not disproportionately killed by the police. In fact, I think it's the opposite. I think they're underrepresented in terms of how many Black people are shot by the police. Now, this is important because a lot of TJ's argument is about this statistic, and Jake literally cannot understand this. He doesn't understand math. It's very funny. Well, he keeps insulting TJump for being stupid. He doesn't understand the concept.
It's even worse too, because specifically it's violent crime, 37% violent crime. And Jake keeps throwing out things like parking tickets. And I'm going, when did parking tickets become violent crime? Jesus Christ.
Right.
We're having a conversation about violent crime. He's talking about drug offenses. I'm like, dude, again, we're having a conversation about violent crime. We're not having a conversation about you got pulled over with a dime bag.
No, of course. Lord Tennyson's Pipe for $5 says, the race issue is a distraction used by corporations to distract from real economic issues in this country. America is a land of tolerance and liberty.
I totally agree.
Maybe, yeah,
definitely.
Sure.
Proportional in the fact that African Americans only represent 13% of the population, but it is exactly proportional to the amount of violent crime. There is a disproportion in the amount of violence that police do on African Americans.
Speaking of, look at Jake, like taking a big bong rip right there on camera. I can't believe he's doing this.
So he's either doing drugs or he's
I'm-
furiously trying to type in information that TJ's talking
Oh, you
about.
think that's a line? You think he's snorting a rail or something there? What
He's
do you
obviously
think?
snorting a line of cream corn at him. Okay.
Oh my God.
Gotta get pumped.
Is that his Ritalin that he's like snorting there?
About 20%, but there's also a disproportional rate of killing or shooting of white people, which is I don't think closer to 20% also. So there is some disparity there, but it's not really that big of a deal when you.
I was making jokes. I didn't catch the disparity. Were you paying attention?
Yeah, you're just talking about how whites are overrepresented in terms of being shot. For
Okay,
violent
yeah.
crime.
Compare that one is beating them and the other one is shooting them. It's kind of, I don't know which one of those you would prefer. So this shouldn't be a Black Lives Matter issue. Why is this movement not about police brutality? Why isn't it about all lives? Why isn't it about what is the point of portraying this false narrative that it creates, that this dissemination that African Americans are disproportionately affected by violent shootings of police?
Because that false narrative gets us votes to the voting booth.
Yeah, unfortunately.
It's true. It's so bad.
Very sad.
If it wasn't for this false dissemination, the social relations between Black and white people would be less tense. Trust in police would be higher. Businesses across the nation might not have been spared or might have been spared.
Translation: no reason to vote. This wouldn't be the most influential election in your lifetime.
So here's the interesting thing. Because what TJump's saying, I never thought about it, but if the media narrative had been not focused on race, just been focused on police violence in general, would there be this groundswell of protests? Would people care?
No.
Or can they only care because it's a race issue?
They only care because it's a race issue.
That's so weird. Isn't that so bizarre?
It's horrible. It's awful. It's awful. But we've talked about this a million times. Like, the whole progressive narrative is about the oppressed versus the oppressors, and
Right.
that there's a racial component to that that's just easy. It's easy for them to do. If you take the racial component out of it, all of a sudden becomes far more complicated. So this is dumbing it down.
It's so counterintuitive, because you'd think like people would be more invested if they felt like they were being targeted by violence, right? I mean, this is what we were arguing. White people would be more on board with this, but maybe
really.
That's not true. Maybe
because they'd say, it's not me. I'm not doing that shit.
Yeah, maybe they do need the sort of racialized narrative to get energized about it. How fucked is that? How fucked up does that show the American psyche?
You have to say that, like, Black cops are targeting white people. Oh my God.
Oh God.
That's
don't
evil.
do that.
That's
Don't
so
do that.
evil. Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. And then even if you're saying cops are targeting white people, oh man, it's still, we need our cops. None of this is good for anything.
The looting, the destruction. I mean, there are a lot of problems that this narrative has caused, and it's completely myth. So I can't support that movement for that reason. I mean, the solution is that millions of Americans on the left need to realize that deadly police shootings happen to Black people and white people alike. And as long as the critical mass race issue, they see this as a race issue, every video of a Black person being killed is yet another injustice in a long chain dating back to the hundreds of years ago in slavery. I mean, what should be done is that it's true that the police violence is an issue. I absolutely agree. It totally is. But the focus of Black Lives Matter shouldn't be police violence or police killings. There are lots of actual real race issues that Black Lives Matter should be focused.
Oh, T-Jump's giving us the answer here. He's like, just don't make it about police, dum-dums. make it about other things.
Right.
Focusing on, like education system, or the corruption in politics, or common sense gun laws, or voting rights and criminal justice reform. Those things are actually listed in the Black Lives Matter manifesto, but they're given a back seat to this myth that African Americans are shot more than white people, or at a disproportional rate or something. So that's the main reason I can't support Black Lives Matter. Another is the fact they don't propose any new ideas to solving these problems. They're just parroting the same other ideas that have been presented before, but they don't really do anything to create a change in politics. Like even there's been a few major changes that have been caused due to them, like in Minneapolis, and a few other states have decided to change funding for the cops. And there's one really interesting thing they did, which was they got like $30 million removed from funding for private prisons, which was really great. That's the greatest success I think they've had. And they've also had an increase in body cams, third-party complaint reviews. They were talking more about qualified immunity and getting rid of those. Those are all good things that they've done, increases in body cams. But overall, with the 100...
Okay, hot take, maybe. I do not think that qualified immunity should be removed. And I don't understand why this is constantly argued.
Qualified immunity, explain.
So qualified immunity, it's so weird. People say like, if the cop does something bad, you can't sue them because of qualified immunity. That's not what it means, okay? Qualified immunity means you can't sue individual police in civil court if you perceive they've wronged you in some fashion. You can sue the county,
the city,
you can sue the city, you can sue the police office. You can't sue the individual person. And the idea behind this is because since cops are interacting with so many people in a very tenuous job, they have to arrest people, they have to do all this stuff, and oftentimes they're dealing with criminals, you're going to make their life impossible if they have to constantly fend off lawsuits from everyone. Because what do you think is going to happen if you can sue cops in civil court?
Every single person every day.
Yeah, every single person they arrest is going to sue that cop individually to try to fuck them over.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
and
not
it's going to
a
make their
hot
job
take.
impossible. So
That's not a hot take. That's like the LLC of cops, right?
Well, I don't know. I hear so many people talk about this qualified immunity thing. And first of all, you can sue cops individually on a civil case if you show that they violated your civil rights. So you can do it. It's just a high bar to get beyond. So
yeah.
$1 million or so.
And civil rights is only civil court is only monetary exchanges. It's not criminal court where you actually obviously incarcerated. So
obviously, cops will still go to jail if they commit a crime. Exactly. That's another thing. I guess it's the problem. People just throw ideas out and they don't understand them. Like so many times I see on Twitter, people saying things like qualified immunity is allowing cops to break the law. It's like, what are you talking? It has nothing to do with criminal cases whatsoever.
Totally. Yeah. Completely separate.
So that they've raised and the thousands of protests that they've accumulated, they haven't really had that much of an impact, and they haven't really been putting their money where their mouth is to actually like improve communities or to build schools, or even I would think they should be using it on lobbying, because we know the NRA and other big government organizations can lobby and make change effectively, make political change.
They got to be raising money like mad. The Black Lives Matter movement. I don't.
Well, it's so weird because Black Lives Matter sort of wants to exist in the same space as Antifa exists. And what I mean by that is that they want to be like, oh, we're an organization that you can donate to, but we're also an amorphous blob that's not like an organization officially, right? It's just a bunch of random people in cities across the country protesting. And that's the problem. Well, I agree with what TJump just said. Yeah, I agree with exactly what TJump just said. If Black Lives Matter wants to be effective, they need to organize as a lobbying group the way the NRA is.
Yep. Turn money into political influence, not into the bank, not churn money into the bank accounts of people who call themselves BLM leaders.
Yeah, exactly. You need to be a political advocate and a lobbyist. You don't just stand around in the street yelling, because no one gives a shit about that. Right?
Yeah.
You're just going to send the police when you get violent. It doesn't matter, So, but the problem is that in order to do that, they'd have to officially come out and be like, okay, these are the official Black Lives Matter groups. These are the official Black Lives Matter protests. Everything else is bullshit, and we denounce it, and it's not us. But they're not going to do that.
Yeah, sad. Why not? Is it because it's a grift? I mean, I'm always suspecting.
Because they're run by crazy communists.
Well, I'm always, that's probably a huge part of it right there.
If you go on Black Lives Matter's website and you see some of the policy things, they're like insane.
Yeah, like, intersectional feminism shit.
It's like, we think that black people should have their own economy separate from white people. And you're like, what?
Segregation, guys.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Day one.
So if Black Lives Matter was really serious about changing policy, that would be the way to spend their money. And so for these reasons, I can't really support Black Lives Matter, because it's founded on a myth. They don't have a good policy ideas. They don't really use their money well to make change in the world. It's just not really a useful organization from my perspective. And that's why I don't support Black Lives Matter.